The restore scenarios up to now have been pretty straightforward. We've restored content back to an external hard drive that was a data-only disk, and we've restored content back to specific folders on the startup disk, like the desktop folder in the home directory. Next, I'd like to get into a scenario that's a little bit more complicated, and that's restoring back to the startup disk as a whole. The startup disk has a lot of content on it: application files, user data, preferences files, logs, cache files. There's a lot of content on the startup disk and a lot of activity. Anytime we restore back to the startup disk, it's preferable to limit the scope of the task as much as possible to avoid unintended modifications. I'd like to get into a couple examples where we restore back to the startup disk as a whole. First, let's suppose I did some house cleaning on my startup disk and I deleted some applications, and in retrospect I didn't mean to delete them, and now I'd like to restore them. So to do that, we'll open CCC and click the restore button in the toolbar. I will choose my backup disk as the source and my startup disk as the destination. And at this point, CCC puts on the brakes. By default, it's not going to allow you to restore system files back to the startup disk. Obviously, we wouldn't want to do that. But it's also going to recommend that if you're trying to migrate content from another Mac, that you use Migration Assistant to do that. Typically, when you're trying to migrate all of the content from a backup disk to a new Mac, Migration Assistant really is the right tool for that. In this case, this is a backup of the current Mac, and I just want to restore the applications folder, so that's fine. So I'll click OK. But next we're going to see that CCC is still being pretty conservative with this restore task, and by default it creates a filter and sets the filter behavior such that nothing will be copied by default. The only thing that will be copied is anything that you specifically include in that restore task. So I'm going to check the box next to applications to make sure that that's included in the restore task. Then click done, and then start the task. CCC restored the applications back to my startup disk, and if I click show event, I can see exactly what got copied, and in this case it was just that Firefox app. Another common scenario where you want to restore your startup disk from the backup is when you've installed some software and you're not entirely sure what it installed, or maybe you're just not comfortable with that software installation. A good practice prior to installing software like that is to just run your backup task to make sure that your backup is current, so that you have a very current state to restore back to. So that's what we're going to do first. I'm going to open up CCC. I'm going to select my regular backup task, and I'm going to run that right now. Alright, now I know my backup is up to date, and now I'm going to go ahead and install some software. In this case, I've just got some printer drivers that I downloaded. Alright, so that installation is complete, and now let's suppose I want to back out of that and restore my startup disk back to the pre-installation state. Again, I'll open up CCC, click the restore button in the toolbar, choose my backup disk as the source, choose the startup disk as the destination. Again, get the warning that we can't copy system files, which is fine. The content that's excluded, it's important to note that this content can't be modified by third-party software installers. So everything that you are allowed to restore, that's where a third-party installer could make modifications. So again, CCC has applied a filter where it's only going to copy contents that you specifically include. And in this case, we don't really know where the installer installed content, so we're just going to restore everything. And in a case like this, you might want to just click the preview button here to make sure that it's not going to have any unintended consequences. But we did just make the backup right before installing the software. So in this case, it's a pretty safe bet to go ahead and restore everything from that backup. So I'll click Start, and now CCC will restore the hard drive back to that pre-installation state. Okay, there we go. And if you want to see what changes were made, we can go ahead and open up that event and show the audit. And you can see that, here we go. it removed some printer drivers that were installed by that installer. Click the link below for more videos on how to restore content from your CCC backup. And remember, if you ever need help restoring content from your CCC backup, we're here to help. Open CCC and choose Ask a Question about CCC, and our support staff will help you get things set up correctly.